All right. If you're a regular to this podcast, you're probably wondering, Luke looks a bit different. He's got a little bit of an accent, or who's this fella? Today, we're coming at you with a little bit of a twist. The purpose of today's podcast is to do a deep dive really into what is Claims Hero, who the founders are, and the origin story of it all. So without further ado, Luke, welcome.
Thank you. Feels a bit weird on this side.
How's that seat feel?
Weird. I think the host has been upgraded though, so this should be good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's dive into it. Tell me your story. Talk to me about your childhood, your upbringing. Just give me, life in Luke's shoes for the past 34 years.
Interesting one, because I grew up in the country in I think what would be described as probably a lower socioeconomic area. So there's a place called Kingaroy. Sorry to all those people in Kingaroy who I've just described it that way, but it was. And I think that growing up that way has shaped who I am a lot and what I am today and how I sort of approach things. But in saying that, it was a good upbringing. Like I talked to a lot of people who went to private schools and did that. Whereas out in the country, I think it was simpler. I think there was a really good group of people that I went to school with, and through school always had good friends. But I think the person I am today is very different to who I was as a kid, but always had a sense of wanting to change my upbringing. So I grew up, we didn't have a lot of money. I probably saw that when people don't have a lot of money, they probably do get taken advantage of, and that it's more difficult for them to be able to do things. So if you were to talk to my parents, they would talk about even from when I was a really young kid, I was determined to change that. And I think even when I was 4, I wanted to be a lawyer. Probably didn't even know what that was at the time, but thought that lawyers solved problems and stood up for people. And that probably slightly changed over the years, I think, of what I wanted to be. But it was really probably driven from seeing, probably some of the more negative sides, I think, of what can happen to people when they don't have access to people to look out for them.
So when you say you wanted to change something from an early age, is that when you started to have your first conception of a big dream, so to say?
Yeah, I would say I always had a big dream. When I was a little kid, I always say to my mum, I'm going to be a millionaire one day, which when I was a little kid is probably like me saying now I'm going to be a billionaire one day. Right. It was a wild dream. $1 million isn't as much money anymore. It's hard to buy a house in Brisbane for $1 million. But back then it was a really big dream. And I think for me, I felt that $1 million solved all the problems, if it was a house or a car or, the things you needed, if you had $1 million, it would solve those issues. And I always looked up to people who had done well, be that people in Kingaroy, because there was plenty of business owners, people who had made a lot of money. And I can distinctly remembering always thinking, I'm going to be like that one day. And you would probably look back and I think the odds were very much stacked against me, actually, when I was in that situation in Kingaroy, in the circumstance I was growing up, in the schools and things that I was going to. There was something a little different, I think, about me, even thinking and believing that at that point that I was going to go off and do something.
It's funny saying that. It's from my perspective, it's like tennis gave me my first idea of a big dream. And I wanted to win a certain tournament, right?
Yeah.
That was the foundation of probably my entrepreneurial mindset as well. So it's just having that as a child shaped kind of who I am in terms of planning and processing and stuff like that.
It was funny. Even in school, I was very competitive. I probably had this realization. I still am. You play golf with me, to be fair, but I've had this realization even in the last few weeks. Less so individually and more as a team. So you put me in a team, I'm very competitive, but individually less so. And I think that probably you would probably see that in my school results and how I engaged in school, because I could learn things and I'd pick it up really quickly, but I found it far more interesting in talking to people or having fun. So some teachers I think could see the potential in me and was I understand who Luke is, I understand, and could work really well with me. And then others would move me from my friends to, I guess, the nerds in the class, and then I'd distract all the nerds, and then they'd sit me outside. And I think looking back on it, for me, that was always about things that interest me, I'd really focus in on, and things that probably didn't interest me as much, then I would go and try and find something interesting.
You have, I've, known you for maybe better part of a year or so.
Yeah.
You have a very comedic nature to you as well. Do you think I think there's a saying, like, if you find it funny, you can get through it. Does that have anything to play with your development and your comedic side? Because you have quite the talent. I saw it this morning. It was fascinating.
If people know me, they do know I like to joke. And even when I was a kid, I did. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, a lot of, not that I'm in no way a comedian, to be fair, but a lot of people who are very funny, it comes from very unfunny places, or they've gone through very unfunny things. And I think that for me, it's always been a coping mechanism. And I do have a group of friends where you can joke really about anything. And it's, no matter what's going on, I find that having a joke or a laugh is a good way to deal with things. But for some people, I could see that they wouldn't necessarily see it that way. But, more so as I've got older, it's the thing that helps me fill my cup, so to speak, is having a laugh with people. And I think that from a claims bureau perspective and the people I tend to hang around with, there's, you probably start to see a pattern of people who we hire or who I spend time with, because for me, I'm like, it would be pretty miserable to not laugh, I'd say, every day. So it's a big part of who I am, I'd say.
A crucial aspect to have a bit of fun too. You can't just be so serious all the time. It's that wear and tears on you over time, and by the time you hit 50, it's everything aches because you never smiled throughout that process.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I've had people reach out to me recently who are sort of at that moment in their career where they're thinking about changes, and we'll probably get to the jobs I had, but there are certain jobs out there that aren't that funny, and I think that wears people down over time.
So I guess going back to the dream side of things, when do you think the entrepreneurial type mindset started to kick in for you, where you were became more of a problem oriented, I want to be able to solve problems versus work on them or this or that? When do you think that took over in little Luke's brain?
Oh, he had a very complex brain, to be fair. I think we've probably learned a bit of neurodivergence. Nowadays, we understand it as. And back then, I think it was probably, came across with a bit of anxiety or something. Okay. I've always been an overthinker. And to be fair, there was the career I went down, it probably suited that to a certain extent. But part of believing you can do something better is problem solving. And people who know me now will often go, why are you always so calm when things are going wrong? And for me, it's well, you've got to problem solve. And even for when I was young, I realised that's kind of what I've always done. If it's, you've got an exam that you haven't prepared for, how are you going to work out how to do that really efficiently so that you can get a good result? Yeah. Or is it that you've got to get friends with the right people, or you've got to be friends with the teacher? I've always been a deep thinker about, I guess, how things work and operate. And because of that, I think that you start to get to know people really well. So if you can understand people really well, you can adapt how you're doing things depending on what you're coming up against. So, I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but I think that I've always just inherently liked solving problems. Mm-hmm. So you'd still see it where there's a problem and we can solve it and it's never going to happen again. That lights my brain up. And I think that it's always probably been who I am. A lot of people solve one problem and go, great, I'm done, or I've got a career and I'm set, Where for me, I would often achieve something and then I'm just looking for the next thing. And I've learned more recently, it's because I actually enjoy problem solving. I like when there's a problem and I like that I have to solve it. And that's why when you eventually get into business or entrepreneurship, it's all solving problems, particularly if you're doing something that no one's done before. You have to enjoy solving problems or you just wouldn't do it because it wouldn't be fun for you. The more I do that now, the more I lean into the fact that I like problems and I like problem solving. So when a problem comes up, it's not so much like, oh no, it's more about how do we quickly solve it. The downside on that is that for a lot of people, I've learned as well, you kind of have to ask them, it's like, do you want a solution or do you want a hug or do you want me to sit in the mud with you? Because sometimes people bring a problem and they don't want a solution, right? Or that, they just want to talk about it, or they want to go, yeah, that is terrible, I don't like that. But for me, whenever anyone's talking to me, I'm trying to solve the problem, no matter what that is. Yep. And I appreciate for some circumstances that's not what the person might want.
Fast tracking a bit. Speaking of problems, when did the inception of Claims Hero become a problem that you really wanted to solve? Walk us through like how that happened, how that took place.
I think that if I think about why I studied law, right? Because I went off and studied law, and that was because I wanted to help people. Right? This is kind of that childhood bit. I could see people were being taken advantage of. I wanted to help them. And to me, probably naively, that, you watch all these movies and lawyers are in court and they're advocating for people and they're doing all these amazing things. The reality for 98% of lawyers is that's probably not what they do day to day. But, when we're in grade 10 and 11, we're asked to decide what we want to do in the future. And for me, I was focused on two things. One was that, and the other was making money. And lawyers made a lot of money. So I went off and studied law from, moved to Kingaroy, went to college, studied law, didn't know anyone who worked in the law at all. And I played touch football, and one of the girls there worked at Shine Lawyers. And Shine Lawyers at the time was sort of the big personal injury law firm. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, we've got a role going, you should apply for that. And I did, and I got that job, which at the time was a law clerk. And a law clerk is really kind of like a lawyer, but you haven't got the qualifications. And we used to assist people with really small claims. And the premise of the whole thing was that we couldn't spend money, but we would be helping people who had what would be considered smaller claims. So if you have a car accident and you're a high income earner and you hurt yourself and you put in a claim, well, your claim's worth a lot of money because your future economic loss will be impacted by your injuries. But if you're a 68-year-old man who's retired and you hurt your back the same way, your claim's worth way less. And a lot of law firms were sort of turning these people away because it wasn't worth their time and effort. Shine at the time had seen this opportunity that we could run them, but we're going to have to run them lean, not spend a lot of money, and you could still get results for people. So that was like CTP, personal injury claims, and then public liability. So people who were, would trip and fall. And I had no idea what it was, but I needed a job in the law and I was studying full time and this was a full-time job. And again, I thought, why not? I'll do both. And that job was really foundational for me in that, one, getting to help these people was really meaningful because they were still injured, they were still in a bad situation and they didn't have many options otherwise. But two, it made me realise that you could get outcomes without spending a lot of money. And I later learned that the traditional model of running a claim was actually very cost heavy. So lawyers will spend a lot of money getting reports, barristers, and so they're racking up $20,000 on these claims, and then consumers are getting less in hand potentially because maybe some of those costs weren't fully required. But that job paid me very little at the time, and I remember I was settling enough that I was earning my fees in a week, every week. I was settling enough claims, and I was earning my salary, the equivalent of my salary in fees. And I remember going to my boss at the time. It's like, well, I'm settling a lot more claims than everyone else. I'm, hitting my fees in a week for my salary or the equivalent of it. I think I should, get a pay rise. And it was like, oh yeah, sure, one day that might happen. And then they hired someone else who had less experience than me, and I found out they were paying them $20,000 more. And this is probably I've always known this, but this justice warrior part of me runs very, very deep. And I was frustrated by that. And I said, this isn't fair, I've kind of come in here, taken this salary, proved the concept of, law students like this might be a good way to do this. and then you go and hire someone for 20 grand more. And then being a corporate, it's a lot of like, oh yes, we'll look at that at pay review, we'll do this months down the track. Anyway, so cut a long story short, we get to this point, they don't pay me the same. They wouldn't even match the salary. So I then applied for a job at Suncorp, which was kind of on the other side. So you had the law firm and then the insurer is on the other side of that claim. And they offered me a job, paid me a lot more money. Also learned that corporates like to try and save people once you've left. But for me, I thought, actually, it sounds quite interesting to go to the insurer side, see how that works. And so I started at Suncorp, same thing, studying full-time, working in this, seeing the other side of it. Amazing experience, because the way a traditional personal injury law firm works is that you're a lawyer, you meet the client, you get all the instructions. But when it actually comes to sort of negotiating it or going to a conference where you're negotiating in person, they'd hand that off to a barrister. Like, looking back, it's crazy, but we used to get sent down on our own and we would be negotiating with the barrister on behalf of the insurer and presenting our position, making offers. And I loved that. Like, I loved the challenge of, taking a set of facts and you're trying to argue a position, you're trying to get an outcome for a consumer. I still think in all the corporate jobs I had, I never made a company more money than when I was in that job, because I would always bring money back. You would go with a certain amount that you could spend as the insurer, it's been signed off. And I used to like to have this challenge of like, how cheap could I get this claim? The irony of what I do now is that I'm on the other side, but it taught you a lot about negotiating, people, claimants, like how they would go about doing things. Also about how lawyers can sometimes really complicate that whole process, spend a lot of money. And what I realized eventually was that like both sides are spending all this money, and you end up getting to a position where they'll have a report that says someone's not injured. They'll have a report that says someone's injured. We'll have one to say they're not injured. You negotiate it out. And my brain was like, well, this is quite inefficient, isn't it? Like, we're all just spending, why are we spending $10,000 or $20,000 when we know where this is going to get to, because there's similar claims over and over. So I kind of realized that, law firms run this like a bit like a sausage factory. You're spending a lot of money. They're getting outcomes for people, but then they would take at times 50% of customers' compensation. And I thought at the time that's broken, because you don't need to take that much. And for a lot of people who are injured, that money is to pay for future economic loss or future treatment or things they might need or uncertainties in the future. So the idea of claims, are a very long way to get to your point, was actually then when I thought this is broken and someone needs to disrupt personal injury. After that, I sort of moved out of claims, because a lot of people move out of claims because it's not, like at insurers, it's not a valued skill set. It should be, but it's not. So a lot of people will do it for long enough and then they will move on to other things. And you can see that creates challenges in what we do, because, you're not dealing with people who have done it as a career. And there's a lot of reason for that as insurers. It's costs them to pay claims. They'll invest so much money in policy and taking people out to lunch because that brings the business in. But from a cost perspective, they didn't want to invest money in that. So even when you work there, trying to get education stuff was really tough. But still focused on money. A job came up, and it was sort of a team that had supported all the personal injury schemes across Australia. And it was a regulatory compliance type role, which had a legal part to it. But more importantly, it was paying $100,000. And at the time, $100,000 was like, all my dreams have come true at $100,000. I think it was like a $40,000 pay rise from where I was. And I'm like, I've made it. And I got this job, and I graduated law soon after that. And graduate lawyers were on 40, 50 grand less than that. And so that's where I sort of went away from being a lawyer, started climbing the corporate ladder in risk and compliance. Risk and compliance at insurers is like the internal police. We were trying to make sure the insurer was compliant, and then if certain people or certain teams weren't, then we would go and try and work out what's going on and hold them accountable if they're non-compliant. And as I sort of climbed that ladder, and arguably I climbed it really quickly, I was probably one of the youngest managers at Suncorp, certainly at the time. And I always thought, like, if I got to the next level, then I could influence change. We could fix things, because I could see that everything was just broken. It was falling over all the time. You're trying to get people to do the right things, but they'd get on the phones and they'd just breach stuff. And then as you'd raise that to executives, they'd sort of not be interested in it because that's hard work having to deal with it. So I thought, the more I climb the ladder, the more I'll be able to influence change. And I was getting big pay rises every 12 months. And on paper, someone would have looked at that and thought, oh, how great is that career going? But what I found is that with every new role and every new thing, I just became more and more miserable, because what you start to realize is that it rots from, they always say the fish rots from the head. And the reality with a lot of corporates is that the executives that are at the top don't actually care about the company or the client or the customer. They care about themselves.
Yep.
So people who tend to do really well are the ones that make their life easier. And then when you're in risk and compliance and you're raising problems all the time, you weren't necessarily making their life easier. Through all of those jobs, and I worked at Suncorp for, 8 years or something, and then I went to other corporates and realized they're all similar. It taught me a lot because I did a lot of random jobs. And when you're in corporate and you can solve problems, you'll just get thrown at random things. I've never been someone to be like, that's not my job, I'm not doing that. So I just would do any job that they wanted me to do. And a lot of executives would therefore be quite happy because I was solving problems and helping them along the way. But I was miserable. Like, I hated it. Like, I was earning all this money. I always say to people with money, it's like, you will earn a certain amount, and you'll feel really great when you get to a certain amount because you can buy the things you couldn't previously, but there's a very big diminishing return the more money you earn. And the more money you earn in corporate, the more stress you have, the more people rely upon you. They talk about middle management being terrible because you're stuck in between, where the executives are telling you what to say, you don't believe it, but you've got to tell the people below you, they're complaining up to you, you have to control the messaging up sometimes to a temperamental executive. And for me, I was just never that person. Like, I didn't want to sugarcoat something. I didn't believe in withholding information from staff. I had very good networks to find out what's actually happening. So the more I saw all of that conduct, the more I just really didn't like corporate. What eventually happened was we had the floods in Brisbane in 2022. And we'd had one 10 years earlier, and it was a 1 in 100 year flood. And this was the second one in a decade, right? Didn't math. And because of that, people probably found themselves in a bad situation, because you go through it once, you're like, okay, this will be a very long time till it happens again. And it happens again 10 years later. So I think it caused a lot of stress to people who had rebuilt their homes and then found themselves in that situation again. And what I realized I had a couple of friends and family that were going through it, and they were really struggling with their insurer. And I would get involved and help them through that process, and realize that I could get them significantly more money and could help solve the claim for them, and that they were really overwhelmed. But there was really no one there to help them. Like, there wasn't many companies that were serving them. And it kind of reminded me of that personal injury experience that I had had, where I also learnt in corporate that if you don't have someone to advocate for you, often you were getting way less than you deserved. And I saw it in personal injury because we used to offer someone $3,000 that appoint a lawyer would change the estimate to $60,000. So I knew it happened. And for these consumers, what we were saying was not groundbreaking. We were just looking at, well, your obligations say this, you've got a quote, it's not right, and they were getting 2, 3, 4 times what they were being offered. So my brain thought, here's an opportunity. Didn't know a lot about motor property specialty claims. Like, I had done some when I was at Suncorp, so I was aware of it. But that's where the idea of Claims Hero, I guess, was born. And from there, we sort of then had to go through some certain steps because it's highly regulated and you had to get certain licenses to be able to do that. And I was working multiple jobs and starting Claims Hero. But what I was finding was that you would help someone and you would think, oh, it's their property, they're not going to be that attached to it. I'd help people in personal injury, like, your body's way more important. But what I learned very quickly was that your home is actually more important, because it's where, well, it's not more important, your body is more important, but like, for people, they perceived it more important because it's where their kids sleep at night. It's where it's their safe place. It's the thing that they've worked so hard for, and in Australia mortgages themselves up to their eyeballs. So when we were finding people who were homeless because the insurer wasn't funding Tempercom, and they were doing all these terrible practices after the floods. Helping someone there, you would get them a result and they'd cry on the phone and say, thank you so much, you've changed our lives. And for me, that was intoxicating because I'm like, wow, like I've worked in corporate all those years. You realise a lot of the thank yous are very shallow. Thanks, next, here's your next project. But for that, it was like super, super meaningful. So for me, that was like, here's the opportunity. Why don't we have a run? I'm miserable in corporate. We should see if this is viable at that point.
Make a difference and go off the feel of what it gives and go from there.
100%. It's sort of test and learn and see, is there a business in this? Because a lot of I've always been entrepreneur. I've always been on the lookout for business ideas, attended entrepreneurs things, listened to 1,000 podcasts on business and finance. So I'm a real nerd for it. So I think if you have that mindset, you're always on the lookout. And to me, it just felt like an opportunity because people weren't doing it. And also we had the knowledge from the insurer side, dealing with executives, which allowed us to probably position things in a way that got them to do the things they should that maybe a normal consumer wouldn't know.
Right. And positioning is like basically the bread and butter of the business today, right? It's that understanding of the field and how those pieces will affect future pieces.
Yeah. I think that's right. And it's understanding that every claim is not so unique that it's never happened to anyone else. And one of the things I did when I was in corporate was run remediation programs, which the one thing insurers don't want, executives don't want, they don't want remediation programs. There's been lots of them publicly where you promise people discounts, you don't give it to them, and then you've got to go back 10 years and remediate all those customers you promised to give discounts to. They don't like doing that because it costs a fortune. It also costs a fortune to run the remediation program. So I actually was involved in quite a few remediation programs. So the lesson was really that the conduct that we were seeing on these individual claims was systemic. So if it was impacting our client, it was probably impacting a broader subset of clients. And of course, when you start a business that's helping people get more money, the insurers don't want you to exist. They'd prefer that you don't exist. And they still do a lot of advertising around this now, maybe more than ever. Mm-hmm. But, you sort of had to understand the things that motivated them to get them to see the light and pay these claims and want to resolve them in that process. And a lot of the time it was very much using the things we learnt internally for these insurers, that they're breaching their regulatory obligations or that they're ripping off customers in the way that they're presenting things. Like they would just describe certain entitlements in a way that was so misleading to trick customers into thinking that they'd already been paid something when they hadn't. And then we would say, excuse me, we both know that's not the thing you're talking about. And they'll go, oh, sorry about that. Yeah, we'll pay that customer. Or they wouldn't. And they would then argue it to death. And then I've subsequently found out later on that they were starting remediation programs in the back because what we were raising was actually true. Mm-hmm. And so instead of maybe just being reasonable and paying one claim, you actually end up with a remediation program where you could be paying thousands of claims. So our approach was never to be a complete adversary to insurers. I think there's a lot about being able to work together. And it's been a journey to take these insurers on to realise that the customers that come to us are highly vulnerable. And the insurer's probably done something wrong. But we always say it's two-sided. You have an insurer that may not be doing what they should, or being let down from a whole heap of things that is within their control, like their suppliers or builders or mould providers who are turning up. And you have a client who has no knowledge of insurance. They don't even know, a lot of the time they don't even know what's in their policy. They think all insurance policies are the same and they're not. Mm. And then something happens and they think they're covered for it, and sometimes they're not. And they find themselves in this situation where a claim starts out very much like, oh, thank you for lodging a claim. We're going to work with you to understand what's going on. We'll send our people out. We'll assess everything. And for a consumer, and Australians are extremely laid back, they're going, yep, thank you so much. How good is this insurer helping me in all of this? What they don't realise is that the insurer is building their case or their value from day one. So it often took 6 to 12 months for for a consumer to realise that actually, wait a minute, you're not doing the right thing by me. And then by the time they'd realised that, they're so far behind the 8 ball, they're out of their depth. The insurers have got highly technical people managing these claims or complaints, and they also control a lot of the suppliers in the industry who then won't do work for consumers. They're finding themselves in these really terrible situations, and they needed help to understand what they wanted from the insurer. Because I think once you can actually explain to an insurer what you want or give them an out, there's a good chance they'll probably want to settle it at some point. But for a lot of consumers, it's like death by a thousand cuts, where they don't give an insurer an out and it's one request after the next. And eventually, I always say there's an invisible line, and once you cross it, they're just going to close the doors and say, we're not giving you any more. And that's the same if it's a personal injury claim, or if it is a property damage claim or a car claim potentially. That same principle applies. So the opportunity was really about, trying to solve those problems that existed. And that's taken a lot of work, because we've in some ways created a bit of an industry in the space that we work in, and having to get the providers and suppliers, as you know well, since you've come on board, to be able to help consumers in that. And it's funny because I look back and every job was important, because if you look at personal injury, the lawyers all have a doctor panel that just work with lawyers, and the insurer have a panel that just work with insurers, which in some ways made it fairer because both sides had their people. Not that I think that I don't think there needs to be two sides, but it's just how the world works. Whereas in this space, that wasn't the case. People weren't represented. So it was like even a worse scenario they're finding themselves in, because they're oblivious to what's going on around them. And I think that's why you use, if you look at the parliamentary inquiries or royal commissions or whatever, like historically consumers have been taken advantage of in this exact property space. Mm-hmm. What frustrates me is it's the exact same problems that have been happening for 10 years, and the industry, goes around saying, we've got too much regulation. I knew it was bullshit when I worked in the industry, and I definitely know it's bullshit now. It's not about whether they have too many regulations, it's whether do they care enough to actually comply with it and do the right thing. And the inherent conflicts that exist in this space around insurers trying to minimise costs. Mm-hmm. And a lot will go, we don't try to minimise costs. Rubbish. If you have shareholders, you've got to give a return, and, really you're trying to pay the fair value and not $1 more. And inherently that will just sometimes have unintended consequences. If you're putting pressure on builders to reduce costs, or you're putting pressure on different suppliers to make certain decisions, then that can impact a large amount of people. And that creates a very large need, I think, for people who will help them, particularly in these complex claims, because they find themselves out of their depth very quickly.
Absolutely. No, and speaking of, I guess, two sides, Claims Hero has two sides as well. Could you tell us a little bit about your partner in crime, Alex?
Yes, Alex. We met at Suncorp.
Suncorp.
Yeah, way back in the day, we worked at Suncorp. I'd taken that job just out of claims and in risk and compliance, and then Alex came through in the grad program. And anyone who knows Alex, he's a joker too. And we just by chance were spending a lot of time in Sydney because we were both on projects. So we were flying down. And then when you're working interstate, it's like, well, you got to have dinner with someone, or you got to have a beer or 20 beers with them. And so Alex and I just kind of like got a friendship. And he also liked golf. So we were playing golf, and he was learning, and he was very bad at golf, still is. And I've taken on a mentorship role with him in golf and life, and he's improved a lot. And I think he would explain that there's probably been no one more important in his life than me. But to get to the Claims Hero part, it was funny. I'd come up with this idea after the floods and realised there was this opportunity. And there was another person that was involved at the time. But I had said to Alex on the golf course, I said, I've got this idea, and sort of exploring it, trialling it with a couple of clients. And by that point, like Alex and I were not like great mates, but we'd play golf, right? And if you play golf, not that many people play golf. So we would play infrequently every month or two. And immediately Alex is like, that's a great idea. Like, you should do that. Like, that's a really sound business idea. And I was sort of on the golf course and just focusing on improving his golf game, So I kind of like just fobbed it off and didn't think too much of it. And to Alex's credit, he called me the next day and was like, no, like this is a really great business idea. I want to be involved. Like I think it's a good idea. And I was like, all right, well, let's have a meeting. And anyway, to cut a long story short, Alex came in and he's just like me, we're competitive. And it really got us to focus in to be competitive with one another in starting that business, because in the early days, it's so hard. Getting a client was impossible. So having someone who's just naturally competitive kind of helped us, because he'd get a client, I'd have to get a client. We would go out and, push ourselves out of our comfort zone, because that's what you had to do. In saying that, we decided one day that we're like, we're going to go door knock, right? Because let's go door knock this flooded area, because we'll talk to people, we'll be able to get some claims, explain it. And we knocked on one door. They didn't answer. We were relieved. And we got to the gate and I said, I'm not doing another one. He's like, no, me either. And we've never knocked on a door again. But probably a good thing. But we sort of just learned by like holding each other accountable, telling our friends and family about what we're doing, that it just kind of naturally grew from there. And we were starting the business and working at the same time. And it was, we were doing well. We were getting traction, getting clients. They were telling other people that's the benefit of Brisbane. But it kind of got to this point where we couldn't keep working our jobs and doing claims because we were going to burn out. Yeah. Alex had he'd climbed the ladder, very similar background to me, and had a family. And we were sort of got to this point where we're like, it's too hard. Like we can't do both. And we eventually decided that, well, let's try and put some money together so that I could go full-time on the business. And then we thought that could probably get our growth from where we are to like increase it. And then maybe in 11 months, Alex would be able to come on full-time. This was sort of what we were thinking in terms of a business plan, so to speak. And what eventuated was about a month and a half, Alex came on full-time. And we'd sort of designed this thing where like loans would come in every quarter and that would cover my salary. And we were able to get the trajectory in the business humming quick enough that within about 6 weeks of me going full-time on the business, Alex could be full-time and it could support us in that business. And from there, then the growth of Claims Hero just was exponential from that point, because once you can focus on it full-time every day, and we're also two people that like, if you verse us in golf, and to be clear, I was joking about his golf game. It's worse than what I was talking. No, I'm joking. No, he's a good golfer. He always was a good golfer. But we don't like to lose. And the truth is, when you take a risk like that, and we'll take a massive financial risk in that we had very good jobs, paying a lot of money, and we had mortgages and all these things, but we weren't going to lose because it's not in our nature, and we were able to push each other through that. And Alex and I we always joke because we're like, we don't really know how we found one another, because it's like the skill sets match in some ways, but are different in others. And those differences really allowed us to focus on different things early on. If you meet Alex is far more likely to walk up to someone on the street and have a conversation and try and get their claim. I'm far more likely to do a heap of research, work out how you can use technology to get clients or something like that. But both are needed. Sometimes you need the person who'll just pick up the phone and call someone and not have a lot of shame, where for me, I'd find that probably a bit awkward. But we also just learnt that you've got to try things. You've got to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And we just kept doing that time and time again. And if you meet us now, you look at us and go like, we're two different people. How do they get along? And we do different things. But at the end of the day, we have a crazy sense of humour that's very similar. And you'll hear us where we'll go to our office and we'll close the door and you'll just hear us laughing. And it's like, what's wrong with these people? And even after all these years, you'd think all the stress of the business and that sort of stuff, we'll still have a laugh, or we're still happy to go play golf together. And that's because without someone who can laugh about this job is incredibly hard. And he's also a good problem solver. So you need people in business that when a problem comes up, you can sort it out. And I think as business partners, we've been able to do that. And we have Well, we probably have different risk tolerances to things. Like Alex is probably more of a risk taker. I worked in risk management, so mine's very balanced in that I'm happy to take risk, but I don't want unexpected outcomes from it. So I'm probably a little bit slower than him, and I think Alex would admit that at times that has saved us and helped us, and maybe it's slowed us down sometimes, but sometimes you do need to slow down and just work out where you're going and what you're doing. But we've always been able to agree on something. We might have two different views when you start, but we're logical in that if you talk it through or you workshop it and you understand it, often we come up with a better idea together than what our individual ideas were. But that's taken time, and you've had to learn, and we learned very early on that, there are times when you start a business with someone, it's like an actual relationship because you spend so much time with them. You don't have all the corporate stuff where you got to pretend like you like your colleagues or whatever. So there were points where we would be exhausted and we'd be having a workshop or something, and we would get to that point where we were disagreeing, and then you'd go personal. And we learned very quickly from that point was that we said, we'll never do that again. And if you're the person that feels like you're heading that way, you say to the other person, I'm tired, we need to park this and we'll come back to it tomorrow. But we also agreed that no matter what we do, we won't take it personal. Because you get to know the person really well, right? So if you want to attack them, you can attack them, right? When you really need to get in their head, then you'll bring that out. The golf course, those rules don't apply clearly. But it was that ability to work together which has made Claims Hero successful. Absolutely. I think. So, that's the nicest thing I'll say about Alex publicly, and I look forward to him recording something similar about me. Yeah, exactly.
So I guess fast forward a bit. Great history there of Claims Hero and what it is and the origin story. What would you say is Claims Hero today? What does that look like? Between the culture, values, ethics, what we do on a day-to-day, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's something that's it's changed over the time, because when you start with a couple of people, every person you add changes the dynamic. And Claims Hero has nearly got 20 people now, and other little things popping up that we're working on. So it has changed a lot. But at the same time, I'm sort of proud of certain aspects of it. And for me, we sort of set out to find like-minded people. And to be like-minded at Claims Hero, if you work in an insurer, you kind of have to have this view that they're not doing the right thing probably. If you're working in an insurer and you're like, insurers are brilliant, they don't make mistakes, you're probably not a Claims Hero person. You're probably someone there who's like, I feel like we might be not doing that correctly, or I feel like we're not taking that seriously. Those sort of people tend to suit Claims Hero because they want to challenge the status quo in their job. Now, that's often not rewarded in corporate, but we've managed to find enough of those people at Claims Hero where that is our common goal, right? To help people to challenge that status quo. I call Claims Hero a cult because when someone comes and works at Claims Hero, there's like a process to it, which is that you come along and you do your onboarding training and you're hearing about all this stuff, and we're telling you about maybe some of the misconduct and things that occur in the industry, and people, they're understanding it, but they're probably a bit skeptical about it. They'll have their first phone call with a customer and they'll hear just like how terrible of a situation they're in. And I mean, it still happens today where people have worked here for years, they'll have a phone call and they're just like, oh my God, that is just like so horrible what's happened to this person. And then you help manage a claim, and then you see the systemic issues that these insurers are doing and the impact that's having on customers, and it lights a bit of a fire. For the right people, it will light a fire in them because you go, this is not right, what you're doing. And then you get to resolve that claim, and you'll have a client cry on the phone and thank you for changing their life. And for people, no matter who you are, hearing something like that means a lot. Mm-hmm. And to me, that then makes them a diehard Claims Hero supporter, because there's not many businesses that you get to help people in that way. And as I said, I worked in personal injury. It's not like that. Like, the response from people is not like, in a general sense, often because you're lodging the claim, and at Claims Hero we don't lodge claims, we get involved once there's a dispute that arises. you're lodging the claim, you're with them the whole time. If it goes wrong or it's been delayed, the fault is on the lawyer that's helping you through that process, where for claims here often we're sort of standing beside people and not charging them money immediately when they're in their worst situation, when no one's helping them. They feel like no one's listening to them. And that's a really meaningful impact you can have on their life, because they are in no more of a vulnerable situation often. When we come in, we help them, we get the experts, we take care of everything, we communicate, and we're like, you look after your family. Like, you focus on what's important, let us manage the claim, and we'll help you through this process. And it's, when you think about it, people don't know Claims Hero when they come to us, right? So it's a stranger, and that's this really important thing in their life. And they've got to hand that over to someone. And this is why we've designed all our processes around, helping people through that. But for these people, when they've done that and they get an amazing outcome, no wonder you're grateful, right? Because you probably couldn't have done it on your own. Mm-hmm. So once people are genuinely thanked, it would be really hard to go back into corporate and have that transactional, thank you, next. And the other thing is, Claims Hero likes to have a joke and likes to have a laugh. And the culture side of it's really important to me. I walked into the Suncorp corporate building in Sydney last week, and I had a bit of PTSD from corporate. I always talk to people about my corporate PTSD. The behaviours in corporate of that's not my job, I don't want to do that, we just shouldn't change a process. All those things that to me, I have PTSD over, because they're wasted time and effort and harm that's caused by that behaviour. I'm just so against that at Claims Hero. I'm so against that behaviour of where you want to cut down a colleague, or you want to just stand in the way of things or get in the way. I joke with people that in corporate, half your job is trying to just get someone else to do the work, or fighting over who does the work. So it's been really important to me that Claims Hero doesn't have that culture, and I think we've not always got it right around hiring, but I think now more than ever we've got a group that are very much aligned around those values that we find important. And I can guarantee that if you put a problem to anyone at Claims Hero, they'll help you. Whether it's their job, your personal life, whatever it is. We're a group of problem solvers, because what we do is complex. It changes every day. It's not easy. So if you can't solve problems, or you don't like solving problems, you're probably not going to stay at Claims Hero for long. The joy in that is that we've got to take a whole heap of really good people along with us on this journey. And I've always tried to design it from the start that, the incentives and things are structured in a way that I wish they were structured when we were in corporate, where it's not just you've been rated exceptional and we've come up with this magical number and here it is, thank you so much. And then you learn that you're really just dividing a pool that you were given as a leader in corporate to, if you work hard and you get good outcomes, you should be rewarded, and you should be able to see how you're rewarded. Because for me, I've always been a believer in show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. Absolutely. And it's very true, and that's where a lot of businesses get it wrong, I think. And for me, the people are so important. It's the hardest part, but for what we do, helping clients, our people are the most important part of that. And therefore we need to be good to them, because it's very hard to find good people. So I like to think at Claims Hero we are different, and we, invest in our people, and that we want to have fun, and we'll have a laugh, and we get rid of some of the negative sides of the corporate lifestyle. And, for the moment it's working really well, but I know also as you add an extra person, it changes. So we've got to adapt as we continue to grow.
I think what you guys have done so well too is you've built a mission that people want to join, and that's shown in the reviews. Each one's an independent story, but that story is huge, right? It's months of outcomes, and then when you read that, it really impacts you personally. And then on the other side of that is the Facebook group, right? It's a massive gathering that's becoming. It's how many people are on that group now?
Just over 8,000 people in that group as well, yeah. And I think it's a fundamental core of Claims Hero. And there's so many things you look back on, you're that was so critical to our success. But one of them was that we knew when it was just Alex and I that some people are going to look at us and go, who are you? I'm not giving you my claim. And we were always we're just going to help people. Like every phone call, we're going to help people. We joke about how our phones used to ring and you didn't know if it was going to be a 5-minute call or a 30-minute call. But if it was a client, we needed to pick up that call. And over the time, we've kept that going where even now we are taking so many calls in a day, and sometimes it's claims that we can't even take on, but we try to help people. Or in the group, we're in there and we're commenting and we're trying to help people. It's not about you have to be a client of Claims Hero. It's that if we start with the premise that we want to help people, and if they can do it on their own, great, right? I've never been about, oh, here's an easy one, so let's sign that one because we're going to make easy money. It's about, can we add value to that person? Can we help them? And, you know, what we found is that if you help people as a primary thing, and you look at us, like the podcast that we do is about helping people, the blogs are about helping people, the Facebook group's about helping people. Who would have thought, right? And what that does over time is build a reputation of a company that wants to help people. We don't always get it right. We don't always get, you know, the most money for someone, right? We get really disappointed that sometimes we don't. But when we do that, we're not then charging them money, you know. So for consumers, they see that we're trying to help and it's structured in a way that's not in any way intended to rip them off. And that's what we've done from day one. The model that we run now is not that dissimilar to the one we had the first day. And people will say, how'd you come up with this? I don't know. That seemed fair to me, the way in which we structure how we do things. And I think that, you know, if we talk about the childhood stuff and fairness, it's like these people are vulnerable. The last thing I'm going to do is then build a business that takes advantage of vulnerable people, and you could.
Yeah. And everyone just wants to be treated equally, right?
100%.
And I think that's a big thing that Claims Hero is doing. It's changing that delta between power and the imbalance there.
For sure. And there's more to be done. But yeah, it's if you have no idea what's going on, and then you have someone who, you know, hops in your corner and puts that fight up and understands it enough, it levels to a certain extent some of that power imbalance between consumers and insurers. And it's meaningful work for sure.
Speaking of power imbalances, where do you think, or what do you think the future is of the insurance industry once they start to integrate AI components into their companies? And what do you think is going to happen to the consumer and client from those types of integrations? What impacts do you kind of foreshadow?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, from someone who worked in the insurance industry, every large project they do is a shit show. So I have no doubt in the short term it will go terribly because, well, I've always loved technology and always been on the forefront of this stuff. And we know that those that go first do not often tend to be the ones that succeed. It's often the ones that tend to go second or third. A lot of insurers are going really big on it, right? Which makes sense because they've got the money and resources to do it. But what I'm learning from talking with different executives about how they're approaching AI, all of them are doing it slightly differently, but there's an inherent conflict in all of it, which is that no matter how much you want to use AI, you still, for them, want to minimize costs. So a lot of what they're building is about, you know, managing costs, managing that process. So while there are some that are investing in improving customer experience, I think that you're still going to have these situations in which it may increase the power imbalance, where they've got all this powerful technology and AI to manage their costs, and consumers are still going to feel like I'm getting ripped off here, and maybe they're, you know, more up against it than what they are currently. In saying that, and I always say, if they replaced some of the claims managers with AI, I think AI in some ways actually communicates better than people. And what I've seen a lot, what I've been really disappointed, if I'm being honest, in this is like how much an insurer will make an emotional decision. I don't like that person. And you can see it. You see it in the file notes, you'll read it. It's toxic. They're accusing the customer of stuff with no evidence. And I know it, I mentioned in the earlier podcast, but, you know, I've also stood in front of a head of claims who says, we're not paying this claim because I don't like that person. And it's, you know, there's nowhere in the policy that requires you to like them. It's a policy and it should respond. So I think there are definitely benefits that can be had from it. I think that there's so many delays in communication with customers. I think that AI will certainly solve some of the problems, but it won't solve all of them. But what I do know is that these insurers are targeting very aggressive FTE reductions because save costs. So you start making 50% of your workforce redundant, it's not going to be a very happy 50% that's left over to a certain extent. And I mean, without getting too philosophical about it, I have real concerns for society about what happens to all these people that are redundant. Where do they go? Like, we're not creating other jobs. We're replacing jobs with technology, often the lower level jobs. And what happens to those people when they don't have jobs and there's less jobs to go to? And these insurers and banks and everything, like, unless there's regulation, they're just going to keep going heavier and heavier. And I do think that AI is just going to get better and better at doing these tasks. However, AI, what we're seeing already is that AI will do what you tell it. It doesn't mean that it's correct. So the insurers, we see some of them are clearly using it, and it's clear that the prompt they put was argue against the points raised by Claims Hero. And it does. But they're not compelling, the arguments, and it actually just perpetuates sometimes the argument that's going on. So unless they design these things to actually make sure the right decision's being made and that they make sure that they concede arguments when they're weak or not good enough, it's probably not going to result in significant improvements for consumers. And the skeptic in me goes, do they really want to get 100% of claims decisions correct? Because it would mean that they need to pay a lot more claims. And we see it when we raise them. You see it in the data that's released. They overturn a huge amount of claims decisions. And if they were to just pay them originally, that's a lot more money that they would be paying out in claims. So I don't think that they will go that far. And I've met executives and we've spoke about what they care about, which is returns for shareholders or returns for themselves. So I think it's going to be presented like it solves all their problems, but it won't.
Yeah, a short-term view to a fix that isn't necessarily going to benefit them in the long run, so to say. And
I had an interesting conversation with an insurer the other day, and they said that they're having a real problem because the customers are using AI. So the same thing goes for a customer, right? Like if you ask AI to argue a bad point, it's going to argue a bad point, not that if it's necessarily correct or not. So they're getting these really long submissions from customers and they're having to adapt their processes to be able to respond to that. And now, no doubt that'll probably be AI. So it's like AI talking with AI arguing different points. Probably doesn't get to a point of resolution. So it's good that consumers are like more informed than ever. But ultimately, I think resolving these claims still comes down to this fundamental idea of, can you get an out for an insurer? Can you explain it? Can you quantify it? Can you get the right expert evidence to be able to justify your point? Because you'll see even when you get to AFCA, so you could make the best argument you want, but if you're not the right expert in saying that, it'll probably get dismissed.
And in the personal touch side of it too, right?
Sure.
Like when an AI can't go to the site, see the job, see how it played out, talk to the person that lives there. There's very much a personal element too that will start to fall apart down the line as well. So it's I think that's our core focus, right? That's our bread and butter.
Well, we know that the most important skill now for like our claims executive is their ability to work with clients and support them and the empathy and, to your point, turning up in person and looking at things. And that will only continue to be the case. Like I always say, we can get the claims settled, but we need to support the people. And I've seen it where extremely smart people and the clients don't like them. Because it's really important for a client in our space is that you don't sound like the insurer because they've got probably PTSD from, and I always talk about this secondary mental health condition they get from the claim because of the way they've been treated and dismissed and argued with. I mean, AI will probably do that even more and probably more compelling than what happens at the moment. But for us and what we do, the people stuff is 100%. It's always been really important, but to me, it just continues to be the most important thing that we focus on is supporting a customer through that. And I always say to insurers, because there's a lot of narratives of like, they don't need a paid rep, they don't need a claims management company, they've got AFCA. And it's like you completely misunderstand what we do. If someone has a mental health condition or they're vulnerable or they feel like they've been mistreated, they don't need an independent ombudsman they often just need someone who's going to help them through that process. And I mean, turn up to their house, take the photos, do the contents inventory, arrange the expert, do the correspondence and write it out for them. None of those other providers that they seem to suggest because they're somehow free means they're better. Probably not. It's that consumers need actual help in that process and that personal touch and feeling like someone's hearing what they're saying. The amount of people that cry on an initial call just when you say, I understand what you're saying, you've got a point, and they burst into tears. And like, oh my God, I haven't heard that in 12 months, no one's once said to me they understand what I'm saying. They've got their complaint outcome letters or responses from insurers saying you're wrong, we maintain our decision. I can see why they are traumatised from that process, and it's 100% how the industry approaches those claims that results in them find themselves in that situation.
From today's perspective, Luke, where do you see Claims Hero going? What do you see the vision as? What's Claims Hero's future look like?
So when we first started Claims Hero, we would do all sorts of claims. So we're doing car claims, boat claims, commercial claims, and we were so overwhelmed with the leads that we would get for home and the challenges associated with building out all those networks of people who can help us in that space. We made a decision to just focus in on home, and we sort of changed all the advertising because it would frustrate people that, they might reach out to us for a car, but we did very few of those. So we focused in on home. In terms of where I think Claims Hero can go, I still think we're scratching the surface in this home claim space. We don't do a lot of mass marketing, like very, very little. A lot of it comes from word of mouth or recommendations from other people, which means the people who find us are often those that are searching the internet to find a solution because they think something is not right. I think that for every one of them, there are probably 50 other people who have no idea that they're being mistreated or ripped off or having their homes left full of mold by an insurer. So I think we're scratching the surface in that space, and I think that we can expand a lot more into that. We're very heavy in Southeast Queensland, and we've obviously had someone move to Sydney recently, so we'll be doing more claims there. And then Melbourne's a logical step because we do claims in Melbourne at the moment. We manage home claims all over Australia, so I think the opportunity is to continue to grow that part of what we do. However, there's no reason why we wouldn't expand into doing car claims and boat claims and commercial claims. Commercial is a massive opportunity. Strata claims is a really big problem for people who own a unit and they find themselves in really complex insurance claims. And I feel really bad for people who are in that, but we're just not experts in it yet. And my view is for us to expand into these other areas, we first need to become experts in it, and then we can expand into those different areas. And, I have people all the time who are like, have a strata claim and they're just begging me to take it on. Like, please take on this claim. I need your help. And they do. But I think it's really important that we are experts in what we do and we maintain, we've got nearly 200 5-star Google reviews, and everyone's petrified to get a negative Google review, but that's built upon doing a really good job, doing it the right way. And I feel like that's the philosophy of Claims Hero. So if we can't do it in a really good way for the right reasons, we won't expand into it. But people need a lot of help in all those other areas. So we will expand into that. So I see Claims Hero will become a lot bigger and a lot more people. But that's exciting. And I think for the people who are at Claims Hero now, they'll be the future leaders in the next venture or what Claims Hero becomes, which is going to be a lot bigger. And then there are some logical other things, because I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and insurance claims has been my life, but I like other things and I like disrupting other spaces. So it's crazy in some ways because it's the hardest one to do. If you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to disrupt something, you're going to be hated by someone, or you're going to be laughed at, or whatever it might be. And we've experienced our fair share of that. My skin has never been tougher than it is now. But I like shaking things up. So if something is inefficient or people are being ripped off, I'll always be drawn to that. And I always joke that I'll work until the day I die. I might not be in the same capacity that I am now, but just passionate about these businesses that really help people and have a meaningful impact. Because honestly, if I was just selling a product, there's nothing against product-based businesses, but I wouldn't get that motivation to do it. Like, I always laugh when insurers go really hard at us, or they're being really unethical. I'm like, that fuels me. It's doing the reverse of what you think. That injustice of it or misconduct gives me so much energy to kind of keep pushing. And I think a lot of insurers out there at the moment are designed on the premise of taking advantage of insurers. And it is my goal to find a way to educate consumers about their policies, about their insurance products, and make sure that these providers who profit off ripping off consumers or tricking them are not growing the way they are currently. So I'm really passionate about that. I think I'll stay passionate about that for a long time. But yeah, there'll be other things as well on the side. So I'm excited for all of that.
Exciting stuff. Well, Luke, thank you for your time today. Awesome podcast, and look forward to the next one.
Thank you, Connor. I'll be back in the hot seat next time.